Be familiar with it if you've ever seen Disney's Fantasia. The little section about the Greek fairy tale, the little animals all romping around inside all the Greek temples, and Bacchus drinking his fill of wine and then having the big thunderstorm and all of that kind of thing. The music for that is Beethoven's Sixth. The Sixth Symphony is called Pastoral. It is a nature symphony. The first movement, you hear the sweet, lilting music as Beethoven is walking through the country and he's listening to the breeze and the trees and the aroma of the grass and the flowers just kind of wafting around with the bees and the butterflies and birds twittering in the background. Then in the second movement, we find him sitting beside a brook, listening to the soothing sounds of the water as it rushes over the rocks. And as you get down toward the end of all of this kind of dream state, kind of relaxed and listening, you hear the call of a nightingale and the call of a quail and the call of a cuckoo. And then in the third movement, you see villagers that are gathering up in the clearing, and they're conversing and they're singing and they're dancing and they're just having a big time, enjoying the beauty of what has been created. And that third movement ends abruptly because the fourth movement starts almost immediately, just suddenly, with distant rumblings and wind growing stronger, and suddenly lightning is striking all around, and people are running to get out of the way, and rain is falling in torrents. And then the fifth movement begins. The rain is over, and everything is all calm again, and the shepherds come out of their caves to sing a song of thanksgiving to God for the rain that they've received. And you get out of the Sixth Symphony this soothing, relaxing walk through the country and this experience of the countryside on a spring day. It's something like you do with the 23rd Psalm, where you see sheep grazing calmly beside a flowing stream, and the shepherd kind of lazily sitting over to one side on a rock, watching them, alert for any trouble, and sometimes getting to his feet to reach out to a lamb that has wandered too far from the flock. And even when the shepherd leads his flock through some deeply shaded glen, and as you're walking through, you can hear an occasional growl, and you look into the darkness, and there are those shiny eyes of wolves and bears and lions. The sheep aren't even nervous there, because the shepherd is right there watching and protecting. And there is a calmness in that psalm, a real serene, relaxed feeling of peace and even joy. Jesus said, John 10, verse 11, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as my Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. Over the past 2 or 3 weeks, we have been thinking about what life looks like now that Jesus has been raised from the dead. And we've seen the community that is formed around the reality of the resurrection, this unworried self-sacrifice that the early church did for each other as they supported one another, and this unity of conviction and purpose that they demonstrated. We've looked at how we are called to be the hands and the feet of Jesus, going out into the world to share good news and to do the things that Jesus is doing through us, proving to the world that Jesus is alive and working through us. But there is also this kind of flip side, this other aspect of the resurrection life, this calm, serene assurance that we have, an assurance that delivers us from fear, that moves us past despair. It sustains us even when things aren't going well. As a matter of fact, when things are going really terribly, suffering from some wasting, rotting, painful disease, or having to put up with someone who is trying to hurt you and you can't do a whole lot about it, there is still this element of Christ's resurrection life that gives us confidence and gives us a settled sense of just being able to relax and even to enjoy in the midst of all of these unsettling things that happen in our life. I am the good shepherd, Jesus said. And immediately when he says that, our minds go back, I think, to Psalm 23. We think about the Lord is my shepherd, I shall lack nothing. And Jesus is standing over us, he's standing beside us, he's standing in us. This powerful one who's been raised from the dead, nothing can hurt him. Nothing can harm him. This eternal figure who is standing guard over his flock, alert to any danger, keeping his sheep all together in one flock. He will even say in this reading, there are other sheep off out there somewhere that we've not yet been able to reach that we're going to bring in and make them one flock. He says, I'm not the hired hand who runs away. I am the good shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep. And he proved that when he died for our sins. One of the early Christian heresies said that Christ didn't really die on the cross. That there is Jesus, the man, and then there is Christ, the divine God. And the two were not really one. They were not really a unity. There was just Jesus, and the Christ came down and kind of indwelled in Jesus. And Jesus died. The man died. But the Christ that indwelled him left him right before the crucifixion and stood aside watching while Jesus died. And Jesus, the man, yes, is a great example of courage in the face of terrible suffering. But God, when it comes to push and shove, just kind of leaves us alone to deal with our problems all by ourselves. That's why it's a heresy. Christ says, I stayed. I died. And one of the reactions might be, well, then you died and the sheep are scattered and the wolves are tearing up the flock and maiming and destroying. Jesus said, I laid down my life and I take it up again. He ever lives to make intercession for us, shouts the Hebrew writer. This is the reality of resurrection that gives Peter and John the ability, as we read before in Acts 4, the ability to stand up to the Sanhedrin and look them in the eye and say, this is why we do what we do. This is what gives Paul and Silas the serenity to sing songs of praise in this terrible, fetid Philippian prison. This is what gives Paul the tranquility to say, I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. Now, a sort of Confucian Taoist way of approaching that would be to just say, this doesn't matter anymore. I just don't care. But that's not at all what Paul is saying. Listen to what he says in the next line. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. Paul always has in his eye, in his heart, the good shepherd who's always standing guard and always guiding him to a place where he can be safe, where he can relax and where he can be calm and content. And so Paul says, I can look beyond the circumstances that I find myself in, whether I'm doing well or doing poorly, whether I'm rich or poor, whether I'm healthy or unhealthy. He says, I always look beyond that because I know my resurrected Christ and I know the blessing that we have in our resurrected Lord. And indeed, this is the blessing that we have in our resurrected Lord. The Israelis and the Arabs were firing at each other again across the heights, and every once in a while, over here, just kind of on the edge of everything, a battery of Israeli artillery would cut loose with a big roar. And not far away on a hill was a flock of sheep grazing. And every time the guns fired, the flock would jump and hunker down and get ready to run. And the shepherd walked among them, speaking calmly, calling each one of them by name, and touching each one of the sheep with his staff. And the flock immediately relaxed and went back to grazing. Over and over and over again, the Israelis fired their artillery, and the sheep went crazy, and the shepherd calmed them down, and they went back to grazing until finally the artillery fell silent for the day. Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And the psalmist sings, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul." Jesus cares for you. He watches over you. Jesus brings you peace. And so, as I've said all the way through there, as Sean has led these songs to help you think about and be aware of, just relax, because Jesus is alive. Let's stand and let's sing. If you need to come to Jesus.